Welcome to the Key to Growth podcast, Home Services Marketing Unlocked, with me, your host, Jen McKee. Every week, I sit down with top marketers in the trades, from the brains behind $100 million companies to those scaling from 1 to 3, even to 10 million, breaking down exactly how they got where they are and uncover the secret to their success. If you're ready to grow your business and get real, actionable insights, you are in the right place. Let's unlock the key to your marketing success, starting now.
Welcome back to the Key to Growth podcast. I'm your host, Jen McKee, and I'm really excited. I don't know how often Tersh is not the host on a podcast and is actually the guest on a podcast, but I was super excited that he said yes to join me. So I'm going to let him introduce yourself in case you don't know who my guest is today. Go ahead.
First off, I'm honored to be here. I've been honored to watch the journey of you creating the show and being behind the scenes, and it's really exciting, and the traction that you're getting is amazing. So kudos to you for that. Yeah. So my name, for those who don't know who I am, Tersh Blissett. I founded Service Business Mastery podcast, and I'm a co-host there on that podcast with Joshua Crouch. And together we've created Skilled Trade Syndicate and Trade Automation Pros, which has developed a product called PhoneTap, which is an AI call analysis product. And then I have a service company, HVAC, plumbing, electrical company called TriStar Mechanical in Savannah, and then Service Emperor in Savannah as well.
Just a couple things. And you also produce a couple podcasts.
Yes.
And on the side.
Yes. So I've been honored to be able to produce this podcast and for the Power Women of the Trades podcast. So it's been great.
Elevating the Women in the Trades podcast.
Yes.
That's awesome. I am so lucky actually to have Tersh as the producer of this podcast. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be listening to it. So I'm grateful for that. Okay. So this podcast is all about marketing. And obviously, in order to grow all those companies, you have to know a little bit about marketing. I think what I really want to dig into today, which I think would be really interesting for people, is I always like to start at the beginning. Like, how did you even get to this podcast? Okay. So let's start there. So you had these service companies and then you met Josh, right? How did this podcast that you guys have, Service Business Mastery, when did that idea start and what did it start as?
So funny story. In 2014, I started TriStar Mechanical. In 2016, Brian Orr had me on his podcast. It's called the HVAC School Podcast. And I was on that. Oh yeah, absolutely. So he did one, most of the time it's very technical. And for technicians, he did 1 week of business episodes where he interviewed me and Ruth King multiple times and then released them back to back to back in the same week. And then a couple months later, I got really good feedback from that episode or those episodes. And then he reached out to me, and it was kind of a weird, I reached out to him, he reached out to me at the same time and said, hey, I told him if he ever wanted to start a business podcast, I'd be game to co-host with him. And he said, as a matter of fact, I'd be happy to teach you how to start a podcast if you would host it yourself. And I was like, oh, that's intimidating, but okay. So I actually started Service Business Mastery in 2016, beginning of 2017 is when it really kind of released everything. And so I was doing that for several years, and the guests were asking, how did you grow TriStar? Like I said, it was a business partner of mine, and it's very high volume, low margin company. So it's not what all the coaches were talking about at the time, go after the affluent neighborhoods and that kind of thing. And so we were growing between 90 and 120% every year. And so the audience, the listeners were asking me about it. So I was like, you know what? I kind of want to start another company and target the affluent neighborhood and that kind of thing. So in 2019, we ended up starting up basically Service Emperor, and it was going great. So I had two companies in the same market that didn't compete against each other, but if something came in and it didn't fit our avatar, I would send it over to TriStar, and then vice versa. If TriStar got something and that was really not in their wheelhouse, they would send it over to Service Emperor. And so then we were growing, doing great, did $1 million our first year, and no problem. And then it was, 2020 happened, and it was kind of wild. Well, I started getting burnt out in 2021, and Josh just happened to reach out to me. He was like, hey, can you teach me this podcast thing? And I was like, as a matter of fact, I'm on the rinse and repeat, I'm just here type thing. Yeah. And so I said, if you'll come on as a co-host, I'll show you the ins and outs and everything of the podcast. And he was like, so he came on as a co-host in 2021, and we kind of hit the ground running because we had been in automation groups together previously, but we had never actually actually, like we had met in person probably twice through a best practice group, but we didn't have a ton of like relationships. Like we didn't know each other really well. So I didn't know if it was going to be something that was going to be short term, long term. If I was just going to teach him how to do it, he was going to do a couple episodes and then be off the show. But it turned into a friendship, and now we're business partners in 3 different businesses together. So
yeah,
it's been a cool ride. And so one thing led to the other. Like a lot of people were asking us building out automations for them. So that's how Trade Automation Pro came about, is just a whole company that builds automations for people in the trades.
Okay, I have so many questions for that. So my first question is, so you were doing this podcast, like Josh got lucky, right? He just got to jump in, but like, what was the difference between pre-Josh and post-Josh? Like, did your conversations change? I mean, obviously you have another person in there. Did the topics change? Did you see, because right now you guys are seeing what, like 16,000 downloads an episode? Is that right?
It's about 100, and we go to like 130 to 160,000 a month.
Okay. So was that like, how much did that grow after
Josh came on the show? So it was really weird. Josh came on the show and we were already at like 10,000 a month.
Yeah.
And I was like, Josh, in our industry, we really shouldn't expect more than 15,000. Like we're right
You're
at
like there. You've already
we're
made
there.
it.
We're getting close to the tippy top of the podcast world, because the thing about it is like Joe Rogan and like Mike Rowe and those guys, they talk about topics that resonate across multiple industries.
Right.
And like, so it's easy to get a million downloads there because it's easy to resonate with tons of people.
Anybody could listen to it.
Exactly. And so I was like, Josh, please just don't expect 1 million downloads. Like, don't expect 100,000 downloads. It's like, don't get upset whenever we max out at 15,000, because it's just a small industry and it's a niche audience. And when it being a niche audience like that, it's okay to not have 1 million downloads. It took me years to be okay with that and accept that. And I finally did. And once I did, it was like, but in 2023, I decided that I was going to not be like, I was going to step away from Service Emperor, because I had already stepped away from TriStar for the most part. I physically have not stepped foot inside of TriStar since 2019.
Dang.
So it's been runs itself for the most part. If there's an issue, they'll call me, especially anything permits or license related. They'll call me. Yeah. Like I get updates all the time. In 2015 or 16, I physically moved away from the city. So I'm 60 miles away from the office. So it takes me about an hour and a half to get into town, depending on traffic. So like that was another reason why remote work was a no-brainer for me. And so in 2023, I decided to step away from Service Emperor pretty much the same way. I had somebody in place to do the day task and things like that. Because it was remote, I still could see everything on the screen over here. I have one monitor that's dedicated just for like all of my CSRs and everybody there on Zoom, because nobody's local. Everybody is all over the world. And so like I can look over and see them all there on Zoom. So if they have any questions or whatever, and KPIs and all that stuff, we're in the world of technology now. So like I can remote access everything. And so I knew at that point that I really wanted to focus on on Service Business Mastery, the podcast. And like I stumbled into it. It was like, hey, if I'm going to do this full time, like I need to throw myself into it. Mm-hmm. And that's when we broke the 100,000 downloads first time. And 2024 was really started going kind of ham on the marketing side of things for that.
So, okay, wait. When you broke 100,000 downloads, were they service business owners, or do you think that you've crossed into other niches and other people are listening?
So I believe that we've gone into other industries. Mm-hmm. So before we were really focused on HVAC, and then we kind of inferred the plumbing a little bit because we do plumbing at both those companies. When we really broke the barrier is whenever we were getting featured in landscape magazines. Like it was almost like a combination of digital marketing with PR. As soon as I was able to get us into other trades publications, that's whenever we really saw an uptick in the downloads. And it's weird because I don't know a whole lot about, what do they call that? Basically an aquarium, but it's a pond. And that we got featured in a magazine for that. And then the next thing you know, like we get all these emails from people that are like, hey, I seen you in this magazine and I'd like to learn more about running a service business, like what CRMs and other things. And I'm like, oh, junk. I don't want to give bad advice. Like I know the CRMs for the HVAC world and the plumbing world, but I don't know what you would use for, landscape and stuff like that. And so like, then I'm doing research on that. I'm like, look, I don't want to be an expert at
Yeah.
at all of it. Like, because then I become the expert of nothing. And so I'm like, look, I can refer you to other individuals. I became really good friends with others who were just getting into the podcast space in that industry. And so like I'd have them as guests on my show.
Right.
I'd be guest on their show.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of how I would answer the questions for that. And then I would approach them to like, hey, look, if you want to build automations, I'm game. Like I can do that all day
Yeah.
long. I don't need to know the industry to build the automation for it.
Right.
But yeah, it was really, I still think we're in the quote unquote service industry world. It's not just the HVAC world like we initially were. Yeah.
Grown services. Okay. So you talked a little bit about, what you did in those years that has helped you break that ceiling. But there's a lot of people who are starting podcasts for different reasons, And so what would be some good marketing techniques when you're starting? Like, I think a lot of people struggle, which is why I say I'm so grateful for you, because it's really hard to put out a podcast. Like, there's so many things that come into play, just like besides recording it, but then marketing the individual episodes in multiple facets, which is just like the basics that you should do, like get it on social media, get it into an email, get it on a website. But like even that. So then above that, what were you doing at the beginning? And it was a different landscape then, but how do you think you started getting followers or listeners at the beginning?
Well, honestly, it was weird because in the beginning, Zoom wasn't even a thing then.
Yeah.
There was no video conversations or anything like that. Spotify wasn't even around. So it was basically like having a recorded phone call.
Okay.
Is how it was when I first started out. So then I really relied on LinkedIn at that point because like whoever the guest was, like I remember I had Robert Greene on really early on in the show. And it's because of Bill Spohn, who is one of the owners at True Tech Tools in the HVAC world. Bill recommended Robert Greene. And I didn't realize how big of a name Robert Greene was, especially back then. And how big of an audience he had with LinkedIn. And so when he shared the episode on LinkedIn and all of his followers started listening, then it was like, oh, this is really cool. Like I'm watching this snowball effect. But then I took for granted, like I started interviewing people that had a massive following, but then they didn't share the podcast, the interview. And so it was like, now I need to figure out how to communicate with the guests that, hey, like I'm doing this podcast, but I need you to also share this podcast with your audience because it's not costing you anything to be here other than your time, which is valuable. But I have the production cost on the back end of this. And so then I'm sharing this content. Please share it with your audience too. And that's one of the low hanging fruits. I will say there are a lot of people that are thinking about starting a podcast as a local contractor. And they're like, should I do it? Should I not do it? And while I will say that I might be biased in one way, like because I do a lot of podcasts, I will say that it's evergreen content that's there forever. So it's great. It's the new version of a blog post, in my opinion. Obviously, you can have a blog post from the podcast episode as well. But here's the marketing strategy aspect of it. So for me, if I was starting out right now as a contractor, I 100% would interview all of the business owners in my area. Because if I interview all of them, I create a blog post for all of them and tag them, give them backlinks and ask them to do the same for you. Like maybe you even work on creating the blog post for them or whatever. Like for me, I don't really particularly like guest writers on my blogs because of my blogs, I want them consistent. But if you have a guest that's that way and they'll put your episode on their show and give you a backlink, that's how I would do it 100%. So then you have backlinks from all your local businesses and the backlinks are coming to you. And so then all of a sudden you're a domain authority, or it appears that you're an authority in the area to Google because all of these other local businesses are giving you backlinks. Then all of a sudden, like, let's jump over all the competition because like, unless they jump in and start doing a podcast themselves and getting the same exact backlinks, they can't get the links the same way.
So you talked about getting a guest on that had a lot of clout.
Yeah.
And I know you guys have interviewed some well-known authors and well-known people in general. And so how do you those types of guests on your podcast? And even like looking at the business owners, like what if you go door to door? Like what is your best tips on getting people to be on your podcast?
Oh, it's definitely my charm.
Probably.
No, I'm just kidding.
For sure is.
So it's being yourself. I mean, as cheesy as that sounds, it's just being authentic and developing relationships. So one thing that I never thought was going to be the case was the amount of relationships that came out of having a podcast. Like Mike McAllowitz has become a buddy of mine. Like we've become legit friends, and like we know each other's spouses and kids and all that stuff. And it all stems from him being on the podcast one time. And it was an authentic invitation to him because I listened to the book Profit First. And then I was like, oh, this is really cool. I'm going to listen to other books of his. And so I just gobbled up all of his content because I really enjoyed him as a presenter as well. Like not just his books, but his personality. And I was like, I reached out to him one time and I said, hey, Mike,
I like you.
yeah, like I've read all your books. I'd be honored if you'd be on the podcast. And Kelsey, who's responded to me, who's his assistant, now she is the president of his organization, which is awesome.
Nice. Yeah.
But so she was his assistant, reached back out to me and said, hey, Mike's schedule is pretty busy, but if you're willing to wait a month, he's more than happy to come on the show. I was like, absolutely, I'll wait a month to have it. And so then it just turned into like, all right, Mike, when you coming back on? Like it was an hour, but it was an hour-long conversation, but we talked for 2 hours after the interview. And then we had him back on the show. And then he was like, hey, don't tell anybody, but I'm releasing another book and I'd love to talk about it before it comes out.
So
and I was like, yeah, absolutely. And so then I got invited up to New Jersey to Mike's place, and he actually wrote Fix This Next about us starting up Service Emperor.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so it's just little things like that. And then I was blessed with the timing as far as when the Savannah Bananas came about. I was the president of the Small Business Chamber. And I will say, so if anybody's thinking about doing this and they're thinking about getting local guests, like other business owners, join your local chamber and show up. Like people pay attention to like, okay, they're just going to be here one time. They're going to hand out their business cards and then want us to send all of our trusted clients to them.
Yeah.
But they're not going to unless you're there multiple times and they show that you prove to them that you're not a flake.
Yeah.
And so once you've done that, then all of a sudden you've developed those relationships. That's where I would start asking people to be on the podcast.
Yeah.
That's the people who are going to be the most likely to reciprocate that, the blog post and the backlinks and things like that. So,
yeah.
And that's honestly when I started the Service Business Mastery, I also started a small podcast called Shop Small SAV. And I knew that I knew it was going to always stay small because I was never going to market it really crazy, but it was more of almost like an experiment. Like how many backlinks can I get by just having this local podcast? And I still have those backlinks on my website. And so it's pretty cool to see some of the posts that still get tons of traction. And I haven't touched them in almost 10 years now, which is crazy.
Okay. You just touched on so many interesting things. So number one, like a podcast can be beneficial no matter who your audience is. So you just brought it in really small into local. But one of the biggest things that you said in all of that was how important relationship building is. And if you're listening to this podcast, you probably already know that. I feel like it's common knowledge, right? That like in order to be successful in marketing and in business, you have to build relationships. But some people I think don't really understand how impactful that can be. But then the other thing you talked about that I really want to talk about in this podcast, just because it's so fun and cool for social media, is the Savannah Bananas. So, or if you don't know who I'm talking about, you have to look them up they became like a viral TikTok sensation as what is that called? Like D-League baseball, but that's not what it's called. Like it's not like MLB, but it's the one underneath it.
So they started out in CPL, which is like the college league, like the summer ball league. And the problem was like so we've had tickets since the very first season. We bought season tickets the very first year. And that year that we bought the season tickets, the city of Savannah was going to crucify them because they came in and it was like, you're really going to call yourselves the Bananas. Like, great. That's the impression that everybody's going to have of Savannah. And they did like a lot of Savannah proper, like it's a very proper gentleman, like Southern belle.
Right.
Like that's the perception that they want everybody to have, that, oh, we're goofballs and we have, grandma, what is it? Oh, I can't remember the name of the grandma's cheerleading crew and the dad bod squad that are cheerleaders. Like we don't want goofballs like that representing us proper gentlemen and, Southern gentlemen. And so, but we supported them then, like from the get-go.
So were they acting like that then, or were they just like a normal baseball team?
No, that from the get-go, it's been like whatever is the norm, we're going to do the exact opposite.
So I wonder when they started getting attention for that, because I think that, I'm sure it wasn't right off the bat, or was it? Do you know? Like, did the attention start right away?
Yeah,
Okay.
it did. So Savannah Bananas, they announced their name. I think it was a week after Trump announced he was going to put his name in the hat to be the president
Like
the
in
first time.
2018 or 2019, right?
Yes, something like that. Back,
No,
it's
he was already president
2016.
2016, so it was
Yeah,
before that.
2015, 2016,
Okay.
that time frame. Yeah. So 2 weeks after that, Savannah Bananas announced their name. They trended above Donald Trump for the day that they announced that they were going to be Savannah Bananas. Yeah. So from the get-go, it's been all about like whatever we can do to shock the senses of everybody. And
Yeah.
it's funny and awesome to watch the transition because the other team that was there before, they actually left Savannah because Savannah wouldn't build them a new stadium on the river. They said that the location of the stadium was the reason they could never get more than 400 people there to the game. Well, Jesse and Jared and the team at the Bananas, they proved them all wrong.
Right.
As soon as like the very first season, they didn't sell out every single game, but like once it caught on halfway through the season, sold out crowds. And so they went from, the other team, it's not proper to say their name anymore in Savannah. The old team wouldn't get 400 seats sold. And the Bananas came in and they were selling out 4,000 seats. Well, in the past, I want to say 2 to 3 years, they've increased it by 2,000 seats and sold it out. So now it's sold out for 6,000 seats.
Well, and they sell out wherever they go.
Yeah, they go to Major League Baseball stadiums and sell out. And not only that, so it's crazy because Jesse, they can't control this on the away games, but it's one of their real pet peeves is all you can eat and all you can drink tickets are $30 or $25, whatever it is. And if you hold season tickets and you sell your tickets for more than the printed value, they'll take your season tickets from you.
Oh,
you cannot, you cannot scalp your tickets. You cannot sell your tickets for more than what you paid for them. Like that's a really big pet peeve. And so he'll hear and I know, I was standing in line with somebody who paid $600 to go to, and these tickets are $55 each because these are VIP tickets and they were paying $600 for each one of them. And then there was somebody else in line who paid about the same amount and their ticket wasn't even real.
Oh,
and
no.
So they couldn't even get into the game and they had flown in from the West Coast to go to the game. Yeah. And so those are the types of things that really are just Jesse tremendously.
Okay,
and so
do your service company, so you've been there since the beginning, the owners, is that right?
Yeah, Jesse and Emily.
Do your service company sponsor them?
They don't allow sponsors.
Okay. So
it's completely different. Like they took all of the names off of the marquees. Like it doesn't have any sponsorship names on there. We have had season tickets. Like that's how we sponsor. We have had season tickets with them since the first year. It's something like 5-year waiting list now for season tickets, which is crazy in my opinion.
Right.
But yeah, we actually are hosting an event for 150 people there in October of this year.
That's fun. I think y'all did that last year or something.
We did,
like that,
yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
I remember that. That's super cool. So, okay, the podcast has definitely, Service Business Mastery podcast has definitely elevated your personal brand. So, do you think that it has made it's made an impact on your businesses, right? Because you've been able to evolve and start all of these other businesses. Do you think that it does make an impact locally at all with your personal brand just having more attention? Or do you think that it's impacted you in that now you are starting these other ventures that you see can also be impactful in your life?
Yeah. So when I started Service Business Mastery, I had to really decide, is this going to be a local company where the local HVAC companies, like my local HVAC company is going to benefit from this? Or am I going to try and make this like a national thing or maybe even international? And I really was torn on that. So that was kind of the reason for Shop Small SAV was because I was watching Service Business Mastery is definitely, there's no benefit to Service Emperor from Service Business Mastery. They are so completely opposites because my clients are not going to listen to Service Business Mastery.
Yeah. It's not going to benefit them at all.
It's not going to benefit my clients at all. There's nothing about Service Business Mastery that's going to benefit any of my clients. And so that's really was a challenge. It was okay, where am I focusing even in the right industry right now? What it did do was it allowed me to meet coaches, meet people like you who I can bounce ideas off of, and I can use those ideas in the service companies. And I have done that over the years. Whereas personal branding. So prior to Service Business Mastery, I was already working on my personal brand locally. I was on Small Business Chamber. I was president of Small Business Chamber. I was on the executive board for Buy Local, Leukemia Lymphoma Society, Georgia Police Canine Foundation. I was on all of these boards and things. And so I was working on my personal brand locally. But where I was really, they're two polar opposite, audiences. So there are time periods where it can be very challenging. So if anybody's listening to this and they're thinking about a podcast and they have a local HVAC or plumbing or service company, like I definitely would be leaning more towards the local podcast. What you're not going to get is you're not going to get those vanity numbers. You're not going to get 100,000 downloads for a local podcast necessarily. And it's okay, because those numbers truly, unless you have sponsors or like, they're vanity numbers, because what you really want is you want to touch your audience. You want to be able to have a good experience with your guest. And ultimately it's another form of networking. And like, that's how I grew both of my companies, TriStar and Service Emperor. I grew them by networking in local networking events. So much so that I had to start using my calendar to say no for me, because so I had to say, all right, Mondays and Fridays, I'm working on the business and not necessarily in it. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'll work in the business and not as much on it. And then Wednesdays are podcast days. So then I could say, all right, Tuesdays and Thursdays, if you have networking events on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'll come to them. But if you have them on any other day of the week, I'm not coming, because I was the type where I was burning myself out with going to all the networking events all the time.
Yeah.
And so then it was like, all right, it's not me saying no now, it's the calendar saying no. It's my schedule saying no. I can only do it on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And so that was very helpful for me, because what you'll find, especially in Savannah, I'm sure it's in other areas the same way, is you got the networking crowd, and they're the same ones that are going to be at all the networking events anyways.
Yeah.
So you might
the same people.
Exactly. You might see one or two other new people, but 9 times out of 10, you're going to see pretty much the same people at all the networking events, because they all want to support each other.
Yeah.
And so learning to say no was very helpful for me. And it's that way a lot now too. Like during the middle of the summer, we try not to go to any events. There's not a ton of events during the middle of summer, but we tried. I mean, I will say we went to 30 events last year.
That's a lot. Y'all already have a bunch on the list. The one thing I would say to that is that when you're just starting, sometimes you can't say no as easily. And so once you
absolutely,
and I think that's important to know. And no matter what you're starting, you have to say yes to everything until you have enough on your plate where you can say no. Otherwise, it'll be really hard to ever get to that point.
You have to find out, like, you got to figure out what your groove is. You got to figure out your groove, and you got to figure out like your episodes release on Tuesdays. And we did that on purpose, because it's like the Power Women of Trades episodes releases on Wednesday. Our podcast releases on Wednesday. Like there's several that release on Wednesday, and Wednesday's a great day. Monday's a great day. But if Monday's a normal day and Wednesday's a normal day, then let's do the exact opposite. Let's do a Tuesday or a Thursday, or maybe even a Friday. And so that way you kind of, and the thing about it is when you're first starting out, just be okay with not doing it the exact same way that everybody else is doing it. Because like, please don't look at my podcast and do it the exact same way that I'm doing it, because I've had almost 10 years of trial and error.
Yeah.
And like, there are things that when I was a lot smaller, I had a lot smaller audience. There are things that worked then that don't work now, because of it was a very intimate audience. And like, I can't respond to every email anymore. Like it just isn't possible for me to do that anymore.
Yeah.
I wish I could. And especially building out automations for people. And that's one of those things where it's like, I have a team of developers to help build out automations, but there's still a lot of that stuff that I have to be hands-on with. And it seems like it's easier than running a service company, but sometimes I'm like, wow, this is a lot more than I expected it to be. I didn't expect to have as many employees as I did with a service company. And I didn't expect to have as many phone calls or emails as I did when the service company, like I do now. But I will tell you one thing. So when Jesse and I became friends, Jesse, the founder of Savannah Bananas, he challenged me in a podcast interview with him that whatever is the norm, do the exact opposite. That's kind of their MO. And so I asked him, like, if you were going to start a plumbing company tomorrow, what would you do different? That's because it's easy for people that are in the quote unquote marketing world to give these theories. And then for me as a service company, I'm like, yeah, but how do I do that in the service company world? Like, because service industry is not glamorous. It's not like flashy. It's not baseball. Like, people don't pay to come hang out with me because they just love to see me work on a water heater. Like that's, you know what I mean? So I challenged Jesse with that. And he said, you know what I would do? I would put all of my my technicians in white tuxedos. I said, what, Jesse? He's like, you expect a plumber to be nasty and dirty. And if they show up at your house with a white tuxedo on, what's going to go through your mind? You're like, well, they either don't do any work or you have a lot of tuxedos in the back of the van. He was like, well, yeah, I'd have like 6 every single day so they could change, but
oh my God, that's so smart.
It'd be the exact opposite. You think of like just dirty and having this like feces all over a plumber and stuff like that. And they show up in a white tuxedo and then all of a sudden it's like, you're clean. It's not what I expected. And so I was like, yeah. So that's when so at that point is when Jesse challenged me to start wearing a 3-piece suit. He's like, you're in the trade that's known for being dirty, being nasty, not showing up on time, not communicating well. Do the exact opposite. Over communicate. Like dress completely different. So like all of our guys wear khaki pants with black shirts with orange undershirts. And so it's like they look very professional. They're not wearing white tuxedos, but like the 3-piece suits, that's what I wear if I'm going on a job. Like I'm wearing the same thing that I would wear when I'm recording podcast. And so like that was something that Jesse challenged me with. We started doing things like sending balloons to clients on the anniversary of changing out their air conditioning unit. Let's say happy birthday on them and send them to their work. And they're like,
oh my gosh,
not my birthday. They look at the card and it says happy birthday to your air conditioning unit. And so like you're carrying around balloons. They say happy birthday in the office and people are like, happy birthday. And then you're like, have that awkward conversation where it's not my birthday. It's the air conditioning unit's birthday. And then they're like, weird, but okay, I get it.
But also who installed your AC? Like who's sending you? That's awesome.
Exactly. Those types of things. We have automations built out that if anybody gets a system change out or a factory refresh, so we'll do like factory refreshes on systems, it automatically triggers Mary, who's our mobile massage therapist, to come out to their home to help them de-stress during a stressful time. We actually had accidentally was sent to Jared, who's the president of the Small Business Chamber, sent it to his wife, and she was 9 months pregnant.
Oh no.
And Mary was like, hey, I'm calling to help, like to schedule a time to come out to give you a massage. And she's like, unfortunately, I'm pregnant. And she's like, that's okay. I do prenatal massages as well. And then so she starts bawling. She's crying. Jared's sitting next to her. And Jared's like, why are you crying? Who am I have to go beat up?
Right.
And she's like, no, they're happy tears. Like I was definitely like surprised because I really needed this right now. And so now Jared's touring the country telling this story about how we've surprised his wife with a massage after what was a very stressful time because it was the middle of summer. She's 9 months pregnant. Her air conditioning stops working. And so we're out there changing our air conditioning. And then Mary comes and, the next day or two and is giving her a massage in her own home, the privacy of her own home. And all of it was a complete surprise. We didn't tell them that they were going to do that.
Yeah.
And honestly, I forgot that we did it until Jared. That's the thing about automations is sometimes you just forget about an automation that's being done. And then Jared calls me up and is like, dude, you made Kelsey cry. And I was like, my bad, dude.
No.
Like, what do I need to do? Like, I'll be out there. Like, I'll come out there myself. Is the air conditioner broke? He's like, no, not like that. She was so excited to have Mary come over and give her a massage.
That's so cool. And just like the power of what automation can do. Like Tersh and I don't think we were recording when we were talking about this, but with the idea that like AI can make you feel like you're cheating. And I know that some people definitely can feel like that. I mean, but I try to remind myself like Industrial Revolution. I always think about that, right? Because the Industrial Revolution shook everything up to where people really felt like how we feel now with like, well, if AI can do everything, like what do we need humans for? And what happens is that we evolve and the humans are needed for other things. And so that's always how I think about AI is like, if I can do something faster and get better results, like if I can sit there and get something better than what I could do on my own, that's going to take me a lot longer. Why would I continue to spend all of that time and energy on that when I can move faster now because I have something helping me? And so that's what automation does. Now, not only do you not have to think about it because that takes up brain space and it takes up all of those things, but you also are creating a better experience for your customers. I mean, that type of marketing you can't replicate. It wasn't overly expensive. Like mobile masseuse maybe cost you $250, like, and that's on the high end. And then now you have somebody talking about you for years on this amazing story that you could never replicate that type of marketing.
I don't know why we thought about it, but we went to Service World Expo, and because it was in Orlando, we were like, hey, Mary, why don't you come with us to Orlando to Service World? And I mean, she was going to all the way up until like the last week. And then an emergency came up, and then we were like, we've already like kind of told a couple people that you're bringing. We got to figure this out. So we
Yeah.
actually found an online service that provides all kind. Like you could get a mobile nail salon.
Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
Like you could get anything you wanted as far as like little party things going on. So we actually had 2 different massage therapists come to our booth at Service World Expo, and they were giving massages at our booth at Service World. And on the last day, like everybody had already completely taken down their booth. Our booth's still like completely up. Everybody's
Y'all
around
had
our booth.
massages at your booth.
Yeah, we had like there's line of people that are just like waiting to get massages, and so we couldn't tear down.
What an amazing reason to get people to come and talk to you.
We couldn't tear down until well after everybody else was completely torn down and had their boxes already taken out and stuff like that, because people were just standing around talking to us about and waiting on the massage therapist. And they actually are going to be at all the rest of the events that we'll be at. They're already agreed to come to the rest of the events of the year for this year.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's like we do about 80,000 zaps is what it's called inside of Zapier a month. And a lot of, unfortunately, there's times where I just completely forget. But the thing about it is you hit the nail on the head when you said it creates a very consistent client experience.
Yeah.
So every time somebody books a service call with us, they get an automated message. And most of the CRMs can do this now. But I preferred to send out a message with a video of me, and the video lays out everything. So it holds the technicians accountable as well. Hey, when you're on the service call, if you're not already a member of ours, ask the technician how you can save 15% on your service call. Because then if the technician doesn't present the membership option to them, then they're like, hey, Tersh mentioned in the video that I could save 15%. How is that? Boom. Yeah. There it is for them. Like, oh, by the way, like there are times where things happen that we don't expect it. So we don't always have the money saved for this. Don't fret, because we have financing available. Yeah. We have 0% financing available. Even if you have the money and you want to spend my money instead of your money, just ask for 0% financing. And so then I'm starting the conversation with the homeowner before the technician even gets there. And I'm saying, hey, we're going to get there. We're going to wear shoe covers. We have a floor mat to put underneath our tool bag, doesn't sit on your floor. And so little things like that. Now the technician knows that the homeowner knows that they're expected to wear shoe covers, knows that they're supposed to have their floor mat out and their tool bag shouldn't be sitting on their nice white carpet or whatever. Right. And so there's no excuses at that point as to like the inconsistency of client service. So yeah, automations like that are the ones that I really I enjoy building them. I mean, things as simple as like, okay, so we're doing a podcast episode. You schedule the podcast through Calendly or whatever app, and then all of a sudden it creates Google Drive folder with all of the answers from the Calendly questions, but also you can automatically have spots for like, okay, this is where their headshot goes. This is where like client research goes or guest research goes. So then you have your Google Doc that's already created. Yeah. You get ready to do the podcast interview. You can skim over the Google Doc that was created automatically, and it brings all the information into that document, and boom, it's already done and it's automated. And the post-production can be the exact same way after the fact.
That's amazing. Okay. We have talked for a really long time. And not only did you share so many amazing things about starting a podcast, both in your industry or locally, but also the last things that you just talked about are incredible marketing tips for any trades owners. So at the end of the podcast, there is always the big question of the day, which is what is the key to growth in marketing?
I would say the key to growth for me to never stop learning, A/B test everything. Just because it didn't work last year and it worked the year before, it might work again this year. Like things just, the only constant is change. And as much as I guilty of this myself, don't set it and forget it. Like that, I've done that more times than I like to admit. And don't put your head in the sand. Like there's so many people, including Josh Crouch, my business partner, who refuses to play in the TikTok sandbox. There was so much potential there. And then whenever the quote unquote TikTok ban happened, and then Josh is like, oh, see, I told you. That's why I never messed with it. And then like, you sound like such a boomer, Josh. Like, why you sound so like an old geezer? Like, see, I told you so. But for real though, like, don't be afraid. Like, but the thing about it is like, that's also a little catch-22 because you can't do everything. So honestly, for me, like hire the best people you can. And while I'm guilty of doing some of this myself, don't try to do everything yourself. Like there are times where like I just didn't have the money, so I had to learn how to build a website and things like that. And so I don't fault anybody for being in that situation. But once you have the budget, like pay somebody else. Don't do everything.
Yeah, 100%.
That's the only way that I could get away from companies, was allowing other people to do it even 80% as good as I could do it. Sometimes like I thought I could design like a one pager, and then I give it to Grace, and then she makes me look like an elementary school art student. And I'm like, wow, you just did that in half the time that I did. And you made it look a gazillion times better than I made it. So like that just like shows that I don't need to be doing that at all.
100%. Okay. So in case somebody doesn't know where to find you and are trying to find you online, where should they look?
Type in TERSH and then I'll pop up.
The only person named Tersh. That's who's going to pop up.
Funny story though. Tersh is a very popular female name in Latin America.
Oh, well, there you go.
I did not know that. There's a couple people who outrank me on Instagram are ladies in South America area. But
that's so funny.
For the most part, if you're looking in the US, Tersh or Tersh Blissett. But yeah, that's it. My handle on most social media platforms is Tersh Blissett. My goal is to get the one word before I get to 50. So
like Madonna. You can also look up Service Business Mastery podcast, which is linked in all of our podcast content too, since they do produce our show, and we're grateful.
Yes.
All right, Tersh. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure.